All right, everybody, welcome back to the Identity Jedi Show. You guys know it's your favorite host, the Identity Jedi, also known as David Lee. I'm here today with a special guest, Mr. Eric Olden from Strata.io. Eric, welcome to the show and thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me, David.
So I'm excited to have you guys on the show today. I became a fan of Strata. I'm trying to think where I saw you guys at. I'm pretty sure it was Gartner. It might have been Identiverse too, but I went by the booth, loved what you guys were doing from a product perspective and love what it means from the identity industry perspective. So I was super happy to get you guys to come on and just kind of talk about like have a conversation about the product and what you guys do and where you guys feel that you're different. So with that, we'll get started, but I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself to everybody and just tell us a little about yourself and what you do over at Strata.
Yeah, great. So I'm Eric Olden. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Strata. I've been in identity for a long time. First, I was a founder and CTO of Securant, one of the co-authors of SAML. Then I was the CEO of Simplified. We did SaaS single sign-on. And then I ran identity at Oracle. And then I started Strata. So I've been in identity for a long time, since the 90s.
Yeah. No, you know what? That's the one thing I've come to love about identity. Like, right, once you get in it, you just it's like I guess anybody can say this about their industry, but like once you get in it, man, you just love it. You stay in it. You want to keep going. There's so many problems to solve. There's so many different ways to do it. And then of course, like with anything with technology, right? We grow and change, and new things come out, and like, oh man, like you're like, I remember I had this problem. Now I can solve it better.
It's so
So
true.
it's one of the great things I love about it. So tell us a little bit about Strata, right? So when you were looking at this, and what was the moment, right? Whether it was like Doc Brown, right? Like slipped off the toilet and it hit you. It was like, this is what I got to do. Or if you were driving in your car or whatever, like what was the one thing that you said, no, we're definitely going to go solve this, and this is what I want to do.
Yeah, well, great question. I think what I would say is around identity orchestration. That's what the focus of my company now, Strata, what we do. And there are a couple things that happened when I just left Oracle, and
Hmm.
I did great experience at Oracle because at Oracle you've got access to the world's biggest organizations, right?
Right.
Everything's done at massive scale. And there was this big shift that we saw going on to the cloud, where people were moving not just to one cloud, but they were going to multiple clouds. And my role at Oracle was to get them to use the Oracle cloud and all of the cloud technologies we were doing. And it became pretty clear to me that it wasn't going to be a winner takes all in the cloud. And instead, you're going to have multiple clouds. And everybody I was talking to was using Amazon and Azure and Oracle and Google. So the interesting thing was, well, if you can't have everything in one place, how do you manage it when it's everywhere? And that really changed my point of view. And I happened to be on a surf trip with the two people who became my co-founders, and I was sitting in the ocean in Sri Lanka and just had this realization that instead of trying to put everything in one place, what if we
Right.
just embrace the idea that everything's going to exist all over the place, and really took the thinking from one organization or one set of silos to everything's a silo, everything's everywhere. And it became a really challenging problem to solve. And then I said, well, nobody has tried to solve this problem, although it's been hiding in plain sight. What if
Right.
we created a software that solved that natively? And that was the moment where identity orchestration, as I see it, was born. So beautiful place, and I think a wonderful idea.
I would say that there you go, man. Like it's nothing better than being out in the water, right? And you kind of connect and kind of get that aha moment. So that's that's awesome. And you hit on a couple of different topics that I love, and I promise I won't go on a rant. We won't deep dive on this. Maybe we'll come back later and we'll talk about that. But the whole multi-cloud thing, right? And as we start to work with these customers, we see within the identity industry. To your point, like there's no stopping it, right? So why come in and just say, okay, no, only use one? Okay, you're going to use multiple. Let's just let that happen. So to see that, and as we see this cloud growth just kind of really accelerate, right, to where most of the customers that I would talk to, they're 80, 90, a lot of more 100% cloud, right? And you still have the bigger legacy companies who are trying to be cloud first and moving over, but we're starting to see more and more companies where that's just the way to go. And so when you have that, you've got to start to be able to lean into where the customer's going and create products that fit them for where they're at. So with identity orchestration and what Strata does, what would you say, like, what's the, let's take a step deeper into like, what's the actual problem that's solved, like the actual, like use case where it's like, hey, like using identity orchestration, it makes this thing better.
Yeah, so great question. I think there's, just to level set, when we talk about identity orchestration, there's all of the identity concerns that we're all familiar with: authentication, access control, authorization, audit, governance, things of that type. And with multi-cloud, you've got that problem in a lot of different places, two or
Right.
more in
Yeah.
multi-cloud. So the trick is, well, how do you think about your access, for instance, in a consistent way, where you may have part of your business using Okta for single sign-on to your SaaS applications, and another part of your business using Azure AD from Microsoft. Maybe that's your commercial website. And so now you've got two places where you've got identity and access. And so if you're the practitioner and you're saying, well, I've got these two IDPs, how do I use them for what they're both respectively strong for? And at that point, that's where you need an overarching orchestration layer that allows you to, for instance, create a policy that can span whether a user authenticates in Okta and then be able to use that same identity over in an Azure controlled world. So orchestration is really about keeping things consistent between these two IDPs, for instance. And then from the application side, you've got in the enterprise hundreds, if not thousands of applications. And so that's where you need to deliver this identity. And that's always been the challenge in identity, is the last mile integration, right? How do you get identity into the application? And historically, that meant that you had to custom code it. And, we started back in the day with cookies, and that turned into SAML and then later OIDC. And for the enterprise that's trying to modernize their applications and move them to the cloud, they've got a mix and a match of all of these different kind of integration patterns. And historically, if you wanted to switch one thing with another, you had to rewrite the application, and that just can't scale. And so what orchestration allows you to do is to decouple your application from your identity layer. And so with software, you don't need to recode your application because you can mix and match your IDPs with your applications without doing any custom code. And then the third part of it is, how do you integrate all of the different vendors and technologies on your infrastructure? And in that, we think about that as a fabric or an identity fabric. I think Gartner calls it a cybersecurity mesh. And when you think about that, I'm talking about your LDAP, your directories, access management systems, your authentication systems, and the list goes on. And over time, people have gotten a lot of these different technologies. But the problem is that the different vendors, they come and they go, they acquire one another, and technology becomes outdated and end of life. So you have this really challenging environment in the enterprise of all of this fragmentation. So with orchestration, you create this layer, an abstraction layer called an identity fabric, and that allow you to then abstract out, like, for instance, a legacy identity system and switch it with a modern one without changing the applications that we're talking about in this place. So three things: abstraction and consistency and integration. That's really what identity orchestration is all about.
I love it. Truly, helping to solve that problem, like within identity, to your point, that last mile, right? I saw so many organizations and their identity projects always seem to stall because it's like, okay, they come in and they integrate, they give identity, they got access requests, they do an authentication, they're great. And it's great for like the AD enabled apps, right? And an LDAP enabled app, right? And so that's, and some organizations will do hundreds of applications and you're like, yes. And it's like, great, but we have these other 400 that we can't get to, right? And it's like, okay, either we have to go tell the app developers, hey, can you go shift your code and get on their time schedule, right? It's always been that kind of struggle. So that's awesome that you guys are kind of bringing, that layer there. Quick question, and we'll go a little technical here, but not super. So, like in that access, when you have like the multiple IDPs, are you guys just like kind of moving the authentication from like being able like to broker the authentication between one another? Or are you guys actually do anything with like the token itself? Like, do you guys like redo the token and add more claims into it, or do you guys stay out of that and just go, hey, we're just able to say if it's Microsoft, it's Avaka, whoever, like we can take it and then pass it to whoever?
Yeah, no, that's an insightful question. I think the way that we handle that from a technical standpoint is to be able to transform any session into any other kind of session on the
Gotcha.
fly without any changing. So some way to think about it is like your travel adapter. You go to Europe or you go to Asia,
Right.
you've got your thing you get at the travel store, and it has every
Right.
kind of module. And so you go to the hotel room, you're not worried, can I plug my laptop in? Well, if you got this adapter, it works anywhere in the world. And
Right.
so that's kind of the technology. So we have this capability. The workhorse of our software is called an orchestrator, and it's a runtime system, and it can be a proxy, but it's not like the proxies that are out there, the Nginx or the Apache ones, right? So we
Right.
built it from scratch. And what it does is it'll take a session in one end, for instance, say a legacy cookie-based session, but the application we want to connect with is going to use OIDC. So the orchestrator can transform a cookie session into an OIDC session.
Nice.
And so it basically can transform any into any. And that's the magic that allows us to say, look, you don't ever have to change your application. It'd be like going into a hotel room. You're not going to change what's in the wall. You use the
Right.
adapter, that'll solve your problem, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the way to think about it, is a runtime session and token transformation. And it is all done in a really secure and trusted way. So we're really experienced working with these sensitive, credentials and
Right.
sessions.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
keys to the kingdom. So you need to do that in a very trusted, high secure way. So yeah, security is built in.
So shifting gears just a little bit, right? You've got a background in identity, right? So you've seen it now kind of go through these different phases, right? I always like to say, like, when I got started in identity early 2000s, it was like in its infancy phase, right? We were still fighting, trying to explain to customers what this meant and why it was important, right? The products we were using, although at the time were the best that can, looking back, right? They were slow, they were clunky, like it was a hard haul, right? So we look back now and I'm always so proud of where the identity industry has come, right? And now that we can have like deep conversations with the customer because we're not feeling like complete salesmen anymore and like, no, trust me, you really really need this. Like they already know that. So with your experience and what you've seen, right, and looking at the industry now, where do you think it's going, right? Where do you see the identity industry and then the next big problems we need to solve?
Yeah, I think we're at a really interesting crossroads. And one of my, I don't know, pet peeves or things that just really make me, shake my head is how we're so accustomed to using passwords for security.
Yeah.
And they're just absolutely terrible. They're almost, I think, I forget what statistic it is, but it's higher than 80% of breaches are caused by vulnerability,
Right.
right? Phishing, replay, you name it. And it's like this time has come to move away from passwords and go into multi-factor and passwordless. And what I think is finally allowing that to happen is, if you think about the way that multi-factor started, it was with tokens, and I sold 2 companies to RSA, so very familiar with that whole key fob model, and it
Right.
worked really well for at the time. But it was a hassle, right? If you didn't have your token, you go through all these hoops to be able to get a new one, all that. And it was just not a great user experience. And so in order to get security, you had to compromise the convenience. And that led to very limited adoption. However, today we all have phones. And what your phone has on it is a really powerful biometric sensor.
Right.
And
Yes.
you know, you got it with you, and you can take a picture of your face, scan your fingerprint, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what vendor. The key is that now we can get rid of passwords using passwordless by making it more convenient. So you don't have to remember all of those dozens of passwords that actually that's the inconvenient thing now. And if you can replace that with your, face scan or something like that, then you've got a real compelling reason to improve your security while improving the user experience. So I think that's a really cool thing that's happening right now. We're doing a lot of work with companies like Hyper. I think they've got a really cool technology
Yep,
for
they
doing
do.
that. Passkeys are really interesting as well. I think there's, we're in this new dawn of passwordless. So our role to play in orchestration is to deliver that technology to your applications without rewriting them. So that we work hand in glove with all those technologies. So that's one thing I'm really excited about right now. And then the other part, if you go a little bit further out and you think about how the role of your digital identity matching up with your physical identity, right? So biometrics is the kind of the intersection. And where we need that is everywhere. And if you think about ubiquitous, truly trusted authentication, where if you can link a digital identity to your physical, though you really know it's one person,
Right.
then change the game for whatever social commentary, social networking, democracy for that matter, right? Like let's think about how all this controversy about voting and this and that and fake votes. It's like, again, we have the technology, and I can't wait for the near future where it'll be pervasive and we won't have all of this fraud and all this kind of subterfuge that is common with this kind of early days of the internet. I think you remember the New Yorker cartoon that started it all. On the internet, no one knows you're a dog. Remember that one?
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
Here we are, like 20, 30 years later, and it's
Years
like, yeah,
later,
that's
right?
still a thing.
Still true, right? Yeah, you know what? And I promise we won't go down a rabbit hole, but would love to catch up again and have this conversation. Like you're starting to sound very Web3-ish now, right? Which I'm all for, right? Because it's totally about looking at getting a chance to redefine like everything that we know now, right? And all the technology we have now. How will we do this better? And to your point, like having a ubiquitous identity that is truly authenticated to a person that this is yours, right? And now we say like, okay, Eric, here you go, right? And so you can control it. You decide what attributes you want to share, and so we now it changes how we step into this world of interaction. And I'll just talk digitally, right? Like how our apps are created and how we deal with those things. And now it's like, okay, now I've got a trusted verifier that I'm going to take in that this is this, but I know that this is I've given digital identity to the people that it is you own this identity, and we've given you the proper ways to control it and secure it, right? Which I think will be a complete game changer. I think I've been a little in it too long that I started to get a little bit of skepticism. I'm like, I I hope we start to see real change in it in the next 3 to 5 years. I think we can, because I think the technology is absolutely there, right? It's just it's fundamental, right? It will change a lot of things of how we build things. But I think you make some valid points, and I think it's time. So I'm excited to see, where it goes. And yeah, I think, looking at that, right? Let's just play this out. That puts Strata in a very good position to kind of help usher some of that in, right? You guys have your any sessions, right? And it's as we look at that, we would see people transitioning to that and being able to, now I got to take this mix in, and I've got to be able to orchestrate any type of this authentication. What better tool than you guys right now to be able to help orchestrate that? So there you go. Give you guys a free plug. I'm already a fan. I told everybody else already. Like, no, I really like what you guys are doing in the work, because it's I want identity to be easier, right? If I had a campaign, it'd be make identity easy again, right? Because like it was never easy. But I think we truly do have a chance to make this easier for our customers and really get to some of the innovative stuff that most of us are all people. We're tech geeks, right? We love this stuff, right? We love how technology makes things easier and better. And I really truly feel like identity is right at that verge of doing that, taking that next big step and really becoming just revolutionary in how we deliver things. So all right, we're gonna kind of end the topics on these questions, right? So if you had a magic wand, right, you could change anything you want, right? Flick of a wand, if you're a Harry Potter fan, right? And poof, it changes. From everything that you've seen in your experience in identity, like what would you change?
Ooh, that's a big one. I think it's kind of what I was saying earlier about getting rid of passwords.
The passwords, yeah.
Yeah, but I think really it would be that everyone worked with standards and became standards
Mm.
first. Because if you want to do anything at scale, it's got to work everywhere. And the notion of the old way of thinking about locking in customers with proprietary technology in the very early days, like you were saying, the early 2000s, their SAML hadn't even really gotten widely implemented. We were still
Yeah.
finalizing it and so forth. So it was kind of like the best of the bad outcomes was proprietary sessions and so forth. But once that SAML came out and then got improved with OIDC, now you start to see more ubiquitous standards-based authentication, which was huge in making things safer. And then the second thing I think was what I'm particularly interested in is standards around authentication. So FIDO and FIDO2 and passkeys. And what that's going to do is to make it authentication, strong authentication, make it ubiquitous. And so I think that's really exciting. That's happening. And now the third piece that hadn't really been solved is what about the policies, right? What about the
Mm.
rules themselves? And
Yeah.
you've got a huge fragmentation problem. And so we got together with a bunch of other people in industry and came up with a new standard called Identity QL or IDQL, Identity Query Language.
Okay.
And
All right.
we built an open source reference implementation called Hexa. So it's free. And you can think about IDQL as the generic structure for identity and access policies. And it was designed to work east and west. So across all the cloud platforms, like policy consistency between Azure and GCP, for instance, right? And also through the stack. So having policy that can work at your application, at the data, at the infrastructure and the network level. So east and west, north and south. And what IDQL does is translate proprietary policy into something generic in kind of modern, JSON in a declarative way. So then you can take that and pass that into another system. So for instance, you got a policy in Azure and you want that same policy in Amazon.
Right.
So you use Hexa pointed at Azure. It'll extract the proprietary imperative API calls to create the structure of that policy, the native policy, translates it into the generic IDQL policy, and then you push that, transform it again
Man.
into Amazon policy. So why that is a big deal? Because now from a governance standpoint, you can say, I know it's always these kind
Mm.
of
Yeah.
users who can get to this kind of data, and I don't
Right.
care what platform it runs on, it works everywhere. So we're really excited about that. We just got accepted into the CNCF last year, and we're busy bringing IDQL into a standards body. And so we're really excited about that. So the long answer to your simple question, but that's the magic number is standards everywhere, and
Right. Right.
it should be free.
Yeah, dude, that is that is awesome. That really is, and that is amazing. So thank you for ruining my weekend because I will be researching and studying about all that this weekend because I'm a huge nerd. But that is, man, that is so super cool. As I look at this and I've looked at the industry, that's one of the things that has always been, and I'm pretty sure it struggles everywhere, but our struggle specifically in identity is like the standards and what's there. And it was so funny. We got into this, an ID Pro Slack channel had launched the new authorization service or whatever it was. And of course they defined another, policy language. And one of the discussions was like, oh yeah, again, yet another policy language is like, why can't we just all get along and pick one to be able to handle this and to have our customers be able to do the orchestration, but also handle all these different things. We're going to need standard space to help us go through. So that's huge, man.
On that point, David, just last week we demonstrated IDQL translating the Amazon Cedar policy language, is what you're referring to.
Yeah.
You can transform Cedar into Azure policy and Azure policy into Cedar. So it's pretty cool. Cedar is what is used for Amazon's verified permissions. And that's a
Yep.
really cool technology. It's another thing to nerd out on over the weekend, but
Yeah.
we're excited about that because what verified permissions is doing is taking authorization out of the application and putting it into a
Yep.
centralized piece. And what we're doing with orchestration is saying, okay, when you make that your policy decision point, how can you bring in existing applications that don't know about that? How can you tie existing applications into that? And our software will allow you to do that. So
Yeah.
why is that interesting? Because you don't have to write your applications to the verified permissions API. Orchestration does it without rewriting apps. And that means that you can make, in this case, Amazon or AWS rather, the control plane for the other clouds. So you can say, I want to control my GCP apps and my Azure apps using stuff on AWS. So
Yeah.
we're really excited because it's really about making the complex simple. And, you know, in our
Absolutely.
world, it's like, hey, don't make people integrate it. Don't make them rewrite their apps. Just plug it all together, show it
Right.
at work, and you're going to make a difference in the identity world.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, Eric, this has been awesome, man. You guys are rocking and rolling over there.
We're having a good time. I won't lie.
Yeah. Sounds like it, man. I'm glad I got a chance to get you on. So hey, thanks for taking the time. I like to keep these kind of short and sweet, so I appreciate it. Listen, for those of you that end up watching this, or those of you like to read the transcript, listen, strata.io, check them out. So Eric, with that, I'll let you get any final words in before we sign off.
David, wonderful being here today. And, you know, we've got an offer for our listeners here today. And, you know, Strata, we're always looking for the really hard problems to solve with orchestration. And we've got a nice campaign to allow people to submit the hardest identity challenge that they can think of. And in exchange, we'll share a pair of iPod Pro headphones if you submit it and agree to take a demo of our software. So it's a real quick demo. But if you're interested, you can check out our website. It's at strata.io/podcast. And that's strata, strata.io/podcast. And we'd love to see some challenges. We've had some really good, fun ones to crack the code on. So we'd love to see what we can come up with the audience here.
All right. Now that is awesome. So there you guys have it. The challenge has been laid out. Not only can you get some free AirPods, but look, if you've been like saying, look, I got challenges that nobody else can fix, because you know every customer thinks they've got problems that nobody else can fix. Now is your chance to verify that. So check that out. That is so super cool, Eric. Thanks for making that shout out. So you guys know what to do. Head to strata.io/podcast, submit your challenge, and we'll see if we can get you some free iPods there.
Sounds great. Thanks
right.
again.
Yep. Thanks.
Take care.